Hey, good morning. Thanks for coming. I know 10 o'clock's a little early for Googlers, but I'm here to introduce John Zimmerman. He's a design and HCI professor at Carnegie Mellon, and he's taught probably about a quarter of the designers in the design department here. So today he'll be talking about designing for the self. So for those of you who work on Blogger or any, I'm sure there's plenty of products here that will find some benefit from this. So here's John.
Hi, I'm very loud. I'm John Zimmerman, and I'm an interaction designer and also happen to be a professor at Carnegie Mellon. Like Chad said, I've taught a number of the people here. It's nice to see some friendly faces in the crowd. And I'm very excited to be here today to talk about some new work that I'm doing. I think usually when people present, they like to present fairly mature work that they actually have confidence is good. But I've decided to come out and share something that's very new. I'm not actually sure if this is a great idea. And I'm looking for some feedback to see if you believe that there's something in this new direction. So just to give a quick overview, I'm going to give just a little bit on my background because I think it informs the direction that I'm going. A little gist on what it is I'm talking about when I say designing for the self. My motivation, which is actually very tangential to the work itself. Sort of the core is this fundamental disconnect between the work of consumer behavior researchers and how they talk about product attachment and the practice of HCI, and this work is really trying to bridge that. Some opportunities I see for creating new value in products, and finally how I've tried to operationalize these theories in my own design practice. So my background is actually as a filmmaker. I think if you talk to a lot of interaction designers, they come from something radically different. Mine is film. So fundamentally, I always view myself as a storyteller, and that's a very big part of how I practice design. I moved from filmmaking to interactive multimedia back in the days of CD-ROMs, when that was sort of the latest and greatest thing. Did a bunch of early websites back before there were tables in HTML and before Photoshop had layers. So the really early days. Spent a number of years at Philips Electronics doing interactive television. So it was really trying to take what I knew about storytelling and see if we could apply it to research projects. And for me, that was a big introduction to research from a design perspective. And then more recently, I've been at Carnegie Mellon working on interaction with intelligent systems. And this work's actually very tangential to my work on intelligent systems, but I'm trying to find a connection to bring these two themes together. So I just want to take a moment to set the stage to give an idea of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about designing for the self. And the example I like to use is the grocery checker. So not the new self-checkout, but the sort of more traditional scanned checkout experience. And to me, this is an excellent example of HCI practice, where researchers went in, they sort of scoped the problem, they said, we can design a system that will make the checker more efficient and more effective, and we will get the groceries out of the store faster. So what do you get by adding an identity lens to this problem? In taking an identity perspective, you have to start to consider the worker and how does interacting with the technology make them feel like they're better at their job. So they have this identity construction goal in their work of sort of feeling like they're a good checker. Does the scanner that's been developed for them make them feel like they're better at their job? And I would say no. I actually think it casts them in a very servant role where their job is to orient the barcoder. So traditionally, if you think of the 9-key or 10-key entry system, the worker's really in charge of the system. They're entering information. They're relying on it as a tool. But this is a big social change where now they serve the machine. The conveyor belt brings the food down, and they're there to orient the barcode. The machine's doing the work, and the worker works for the machine. This is sort of a very negative construction, and it's done in a social environment where it's happening right in front of the customer. So now the customer gets to watch the worker serving the machine. And so I think bringing an identity construction perspective allows us to start to ask ourselves, can we design systems that improve efficiency and effectiveness, but also make people feel better about the work they're doing? This is hardly a radically new thought. If you think of the quality circles from the automotive industry, it was about getting workers engaged in what they were doing to reduce defects. How do you make them care about the work that they're performing and create an environment where the work gets done and everyone actually feels quite good about it? So motivation, what sort of sent me in this direction, and what HCI talk wouldn't be complete without a picture of the O.J. Simpson car chase. For a long time, I have been tremendously fascinated with celebrities and with the effect of celebrities. And in this particular example, what I find just so fascinating is that the sales of white Ford Broncos increased after this car chase. Like, that's a real behavioral effect, completely unintended, but it's a real effect. There's a real influence on people's behavior. How can we as designers begin to operationalize this to bring it into the products that we make? I became very interested in that. And I spent a number of years researching how people use products as a method of creating relationships with celebrities. So how do products become mediators, with the real goal of for myself, of can I make synthetic celebrities? And in the end, I found this almost impossible to operationalize in a lab. I couldn't create the social effect of a celebrity in a laboratory. I needed like 100,000 people. And the lawyers really prevented me from taking actual identities of real celebrities and doing things to them that would sort of degrade, potentially degrade the status of their trademark. But this really brought me to this idea of identity, because what's happening when people have this affiliation with a celebrity is they're really participating in identity construction. And so it drove me to this whole set of research by consumer behavioralists. So I just want to talk for a second about this disconnect. So for the last 20 years, consumer behavior researchers have really been exploring how people form attachments to products through this process of identity construction. So what are the products that they care about? What are the products that we love? And they started using a framework of identity construction for understanding this. And as a designer, sort of discovering this, I'd say, maybe the midpoint of my career, was very frustrating, because while we talked about sort of making things that are aesthetically pleasing and that people will enjoy, we were never talking about this underlying theory. And I think this is a huge opportunity that has been missed. I think particularly in HCI design process, people focus on making functional interactive products and services, which is particularly important. But we actually talk very little about how we make people care about the products that they use. And that we look at the very surface level of user needs, but we're not looking underneath at these lower level needs that actually drive people's behavior and their choices. So why should you care about this? And I think the question is really framed with, where do you see the edge of HCI practice? What is it? So when I talk about HCI practice, generally I have no trouble getting people to agree that it's usability engineering. And I started my own career in interaction design in the 80s, where the idea of ease of use and making things user-friendly was what it was all about. So it comes from usability. But do HCI practitioners design work? We certainly design tools for work, but do we actually design the work itself? And I don't think that's an idea that's embraced too heavily in the community. Do HCI designers design products? I would say yes, but I think that there's not quite a lot of agreement in the community on that. Do we design services? Potentially, but are they more than just sort of electronic single point of contact services? Are we talking about multiple touch points in a value chain? And do we design the resources for people to have experiences? And is experience design something that HCI practitioners should embrace? And I think this is the biggest question, because when you move back to usability engineering and even designing of work, in that space, practitioners have tremendous amounts of control. I can build something, I can force someone to use it, and I can measure its outcome. When you start to design for experience, you move much more into this horse riddle space of the wicked problem, where there's just way too many variables for you to control. You can touch a few key elements, but can you actually have impact on people's lives? And is that something people should be concerned with in their practice? So my answer is clearly yes. A number of HCI sort of leaders have stepped into this area. You may be familiar with Norman's work on product emotions. He was also talking about product attachment, but in a very different way. And while I like this work, it also frustrates me tremendously, because it deals with product emotion at a very surface structure level. It's like, well, if we just make things pretty, people will like them more. So he talks about the visceral aspect, sort of this immediacy of liking, and the behavioral aspect, sort of it's this pleasure of actual use. But there's nothing underlying that. Like, what are the real motivations that are driving people's desire in this space? And I think he completely punts on reflective, saying, well, you can't really design this into a product. People either develop it or they don't. And I think the work of the consumer behavior researchers actually address this in a more appropriate way. So while I like Norman's work, I think it's great for the deconstruction of an artifact. I think it's actually a terrible model to use to try to make something. Another model you might be familiar with is work by Pat Jordan. Do you guys know him at all? He runs the Contemporary Trends Institute. He's a usability engineer, worked for a number of years at Philips. He had the sort of 4 pleasure models: physiological pleasure, social pleasure, psychological pleasure, and ideological pleasure. And he frames this with sort of a Maslowian triangle of hierarchy of needs, where at the base level, designers need to consider the functionality. What's the basic functionality people need to complete their task? Then a usability level, well, they have to be able to actually use the product to get that functionality done. And then finally, this pleasure level at top, like, can we make this an enjoyable experience? And again, I think this is a great model for deconstructing. But if you think of identity construction as a functional aspect of what people are trying to accomplish in their interaction with products, you can't separate functionality and pleasure. They actually have to be together. And so again, while this is a great way to deconstruct something, I think it's a terrible model for trying to operationalize and make new things. One model I do particularly like is work by Jody Forlizzi, who's a colleague of mine, and Shannon Ford. And in this experience model, they talk about the interaction or the interface as a mediator that allows people to connect to people to connect to places, and people to connect to products. And this all takes place in a social, culture, and economic forces sort of within that context. And I think this is a great model, and what I'm really suggesting by my work is to augment this by adding an additional perspective to consider the identity construction that people are going through in their interactions with products. So let's get into a little bit of theory here. What can consumer behavior researchers tell us as HCI practitioners that's important? And so there's this more than 100-year-old idea that people are what they possess. And the image I chose here is of a mother and a child, and that the possession of a child is what makes a mother a mother. Fundamentally, without that, I'll call it an artifact, a kid. But without a child, is a mother a mother? Like, what gives you that sense of being, that enactment of a role? And that people really construct themselves through their possessions, that we decide who it is we are and who we want to be and who we were through the things that we collect around us. And finally, it's the idea that people form very strong attachments to products that represent who they are right now and who they were. And what is meaningful to us is this connection both to our past and to our present. So Russell Belk in 1988 wrote a seminal work dealing in the space of identity construction and products called Possessions and the Extended Self. And those of you that have sort of had maybe a lot of sociological training may have encountered this. But it's the idea that people extend themselves through their possessions. And so you can think of starting at your body. Is your body yourself? You know, if you cut off your arm, is that yourself now that's removed? Or sort of, where are you? And really talking about a self in a Margaret Mead sort of way, where the self becomes this other. And you can have a conversation with yourself, get outside yourself. And what is it, you know, where are you and where is the self in this construction? And his evidence for this, and in sort of looking at people's possessions, were things like looking at people that had lost all of their possessions in a fire. And who are you after that? Do you have this actual loss of self through a loss of physical possessions? Who are you after a loss of a spouse, after a loss of a child, after the loss of a parent? Even when you move away from your home with the loss of a place, how does that affect who you are? And that fundamentally we're more than just sort of this bag of meat, but that we're this cluster of all the things around us that we extend ourselves to. And he builds his model on Sartre's 3 states of existence of having, doing, and being. I mean, I think this is a particularly good model as we think about HCI practice. So people have products, so I have my laptop here, to engage in doing. So I have it, it allows me to do things, and in both having and doing, I understand who I am in relationship to the product. So people have imagined conversations with themselves. What would it be like to use this product? Who would people think I am if they saw me using it? And then they have the real social construction of going out into the world and using the product and having people react to them differently based on that. And through that, they create a sense of who they are, again, in connection with the product. And that's where these attachments come from. And again, as a designer, this is not what we discussed in design school about how to design products. That was all about helping people understand who they are. Some early work by Erickson and some more recent work by Klein, and Allen frame this in terms of life narratives and sort of how products situate in there. And there's sort of a lot of work in this space that's looking at people's prized possessions or most loved objects, and that's a great perspective for understanding the theory. But the life narratives approach is really the idea that people have a current understanding of who they are, of who they were that they want to hold on to, and who they were that they would like to discard. And that in sort of getting rid of products from our past, we're actually discarding the parts of ourselves that we no longer want to associate with ourselves. And by holding on to certain artifacts, sort of in that form of attachment, we're defining who we are in the past. So we're not just constructing our future, but we construct our past as well. And so how do you design a product that allows itself, through its use, to reframe who you were? I think is a great opportunity. But it really brings this idea of products as symbols of people into view. And the Klein sort of extended this work, really digging into this idea of loved possessions. And they looked at the scales of affiliation and autonomy and could begin to plot product attachments in a 3-dimensional space, looking at does it bind you to a group? So is this product like we or not? Does it actually make you feel not affiliated with certain groups? And does it give you a sense of autonomy? And when they looked at the possessions people loved the most, they often had both a high quality of affiliation and a high quality of autonomy. So if somebody could find a perfect gift for you, it would be a gift that reminded you of your affiliation to a group that you care about, but also had a personal aspect of who you are within that group. And these are all linked to the past, that the attachments are to who we are now and who we were, but we don't collect products and we don't have strong attachments to who we might become. The Kleins, working with Curran, also applied social identity theory in looking at product attachments, and this really takes a role-centric view. So thinking that people enact a whole bunch of different roles in their lives, how does this play a part in the products that we choose? And the core elements are the social roles that we enact, the social identity, and the ideal identity. And I just want to break this down for a second. So a social role, for example, like a college student, you're going to become a college student. people have this imagined idea of what does it mean to be a college student made up of all of the examples, both positive and negative, they have encountered up to the point that they enact this role. And that for them becomes, what does it mean to be a college student? In addition, they have a social identity, which is who they think they are as a college student, and that's both sort of all their positive and negative qualities. You know, I'm a procrastinator, I'm a hard worker, it's sort of all of the things that they feel about themselves, and generally that's very close to the social role because they want to be recognized in the role. In addition, they have an ideal identity, which is who they really desire to be in that role, sort of without all of their neuroses. But this is really what I'd like to be like. And often that's very unclear, and often it can have very contradictory aspects. So as a college student, you may want to be the person that's always partying and the person that's getting straight A's. And they can be mutually exclusive, and that's perfectly fine because it's the ideal, and it's not necessarily achievable. And maybe not even desirable once they really begin to think about it. And so in looking at product attachments, the Klein and Curran ran a number of studies, and what they were showing is that the attachments people develop to products, and in this case I'm really talking about people in their lives, their own physical possessions, and the places they inhabit, aren't to the core self, but they're actually to the social identity and ideal identity mapped to the specific roles that people enact. So as you enact different roles and a specific role becomes important to you, that's when somebody creates a social identity and an ideal identity. And if you want to get new products into people's lives, if you want to influence what is selected, you know, as they're moving through Walmart, what are they pulling off the shelf, or as they're going on the internet, what services are they choosing? This is the place. What's the connection that you're making to somebody's social identity and ideal identity? That's what brings the product into their life. As they develop a relationship, if it becomes meaningful to them, that's where the attachment comes from. So just trying to put it all together, sort of looking at the models of this social construction process of identity construction, the products play a tremendously passive role. They're picked and used by people, but they're not sort of active participants in the process. And that people really possess them in order to use them and to become who it is they might be. And that attachment really forms through the construction of the life narrative, so it's actually through the use, but it's also in the reflection that we create the stories as we reflect back on what's happened in our lives, and that the meaning often comes from looking backwards. Attachment comes through the channels of affiliation, so does it bind you to a group, and from autonomy, both very important, and they can be combined together. In general, this doesn't go into the future. This is very much grounded in the present and the past. But this sense of who we are and who we desire to be within a specific role is what brings new products and services into our lives. And so as a sort of new product developer, that becomes the gateway to get in, but can you also design things that pick up the back end that allow for this form of strong attachment? And I just love this quote from Fight Club. You are not your car, you are not your bank account, you are not the contents of your wallet, you are not your grande latte, you are not your khakis. Because I think there's sort of this movement of sort of trying to get people to reject these marketing messages, you aren't these things, and yet the research is really revealing you are, but that you're actually a very active participant in constructing them. And you are more than your khakis. You are the constellation of all of the products that you have selected and brought into your lives. And that, you know, in a sense, people are very much creating individually who they are and who they want to be. So going back to the model of experience of thinking of interactive products as connecting people to people, people to places, and people to products. Taking an identity view adds this additional idea that what we're trying to do is make products that allow people to connect back to themselves. How does this product help people understand who they are and who it is that they want to be? So where do we go from here? Some questions for me, sort of coming out of my exploration of the theory, is can products play an active role in helping people define who it is they want to be and move towards their ideal identity of themselves in a role? Can products provide a scaffolding for the identity construction process instead of just playing a passive role where they're allowing themselves to be picked, chosen and discarded? Can they actually play a much more active role in helping people define goals? And can we design products that help people feel better about themselves? And in doing so, do we have a great opportunity to make products that people have a much stronger attachment to and become much more meaningful to them in their lives? So some opportunities. In synthesizing through this information, I identified 4 main opportunity areas. The last 2 are the ones that I care about most, but I think actually all 4 are fairly rich. So role expression, role switching, role enhancement, and role transition. I want to touch on them briefly, just to give an idea of what they really are. So role expression, I think it's fairly obvious, and we see it in a lot of products. It's this ability to customize or personalize or imprint our identity onto a product. And I think the Nike shoes is a great example. And I know as a designer on a lot of products that I've been asked to design, people would say, the product managers would come to me and say, people just love to customize products, so we should make this customizable. But without any understanding of why are people customizing? What is it that they're actually trying to accomplish? And so I think taking an identity construction perspective gives us a sense of what's the goal that they're trying to accomplish, and opens up new ideas of how we might allow for customization and personalization to allow for better self-presentation. Role switching, just sort of a strange idea, but that people enact multiple roles. So this is a very postmodern view that we're made up of multiple fragmented cells, and can we make products that remind us of who we are? And one of the examples I really like is the Ego phone done by Yun-Chao Chung, which sort of works like status messages in IM, where you can have expressions of your availability across multiple communication channels. So your email, your mobile phone, your instant messaging. But you can target it at different groups. So for this group, I have this set of availabilities for this group. And it's this idea that you actually do have multiple sets of relationships and that your product can help you manage that. Cosmos is sort of almost the exact opposite idea. It's kind of trying to create role confusion or a reminder of past roles. And this is the idea of a mobile phone. You're sort of out in the world. I'm in San Francisco. I see the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm like, wow, this reminds me of my good friend Tom. I take a picture. I record a message. And it's left there. And if my friend in the future ever should sort of happen to wander through this space, maybe next week, maybe 10 years from now, they get that message sort of hanging in space and are reminded of this past role and this past connection that they have. But it's the vision of the world sort of filled with all of these messages of who you were and past connections, sort of little virtual gifts. Role enhancement very much gets back to the checker idea. How can we make products that make people feel better about themselves and the roles that they enact? Most of you that have had my class at Carnegie Mellon had to design a music player. I just kind of torment my students with that because I think it's a great example of where there's a clear set of functional needs, but there's this great sense of exploring the emotional relationship people have to products. So as I've moved into this sense of identity construction, it's a new requirement for this process. And one of my student teams had to design a product for moms. So they went out and found a bunch of sort of functional needs. People need to entertain their kids. The moms needed music for their workout to sort of shield them from the monotony and the pain. But they also explored a lot of the identity needs and then sort of synthesized them down to sort of which ones could we meet within this product. And the ones they chose were really this connection to children through the artifacts that their children make. That was particularly important to the moms. Both the receiving of them and the expression back to their children that they care about the artifacts their children make, and the value in sharing the artifacts their children create with others, particularly other moms. Not necessarily in a competitive way, but certainly in a connective way. And so this is the Fruit music player Each of these little wedges holds a few songs, maybe 3 songs, maybe 5 songs. And if you hit the play button on the back, it plays a 2-second sample from somewhere in that set of songs. And by pushing the side ridges, you can move where that sample is. And as the wedges get assembled into a round music player, you can hit the play button and you hear this composition of 2-second samples. So the children can create these these very short musical compositions that are creations that they give to their moms. They're also creating the playlist for the mom's exercise. And it also becomes this artifact that as the mom sort of encountering people in the world, she has this artifact, this creation her kids have made that she can share. Well, this is certainly never intended to be a commercial product. It's a nice early exploration that shows we can definitely begin to identify these identity needs and think about how they become incorporated in a product. Role transition is another area I think is huge. It's a huge opportunity for product creation. And examples of role transition, so high school students who have to shed their high school identity and discover who it is they want to be as a college student. A couple that has a baby and suddenly has to understand who they are as a family. Smokers giving up smoking and trying to decide who they are as a non-smoker and how does that impact their sense of self. Adult children who have to take on the role of caregiver and their elder parents who have to take on the role of care receiver after a lifetime of playing the opposite roles. This is a particularly difficult transition and full of a lot of anxiety. And in general, the 3 main triggers are times of life, sort of you grow into them, life events, particularly like an elder going into decline, birth of a baby, death in the family, diagnosis of cancer, and then personal choice, change of career, change of a personal habit, a new affiliation. And in sort of looking for products in this space, there really aren't a lot. I think it's completely untapped. So for people that are particularly struggling or just having a lot of difficulty with the transition, there are things like therapists, life coaches, and support groups to help you deal with the transitions. But that sort of deals with the extreme edge. There's all kinds of people that sort of flounder through but successfully make the transition. There's professional groups and social organizations that particularly deal with creation of new affiliations. And more recently, and maybe more relevant to the work you guys do, there's a lot of people using personal web pages, web blogs, even social networking software to create potential digital selves of who they might be and putting them out as trial balloons to see how people react to them. So it's sort of looking at all of this theory, looking at all of these opportunities. In my own design practice, I've been trying to figure out how do we operationalize this? How do we actually design with this idea of the identity perspective or designing for the self? And I just want to share a few insights from the work I've done, and I'd be curious about how you think this might influence the kind of work that you're doing. So the first project I want to talk about is called the Digital Self. And we're tracking first-year college students as they come in and they have to shed their high school identity and discover who they might want to be as a college student. And I chose this for a number of reasons. One, it's a fabulous transition in that people are super excited about it. They're just ready to embrace this transition. They're so happy to shed who they were as a high school student, and they have these great expectations of who they might become. It also helps that I'm at a university where every year I have a whole new group of first-year students coming in. So ease of my research definitely influences this. So I'm tracking 20 students right now through their first year, for their first semester at least, looking at how they create these experimental digital selves, test them, and move towards who it is they might be as a college student. And the focus really here is, can we design products that help scaffold this transition process? And so just as a focus setting going into this, we came up with a bunch of product opportunity ideas. So a mobile content acquisition device, so sort of where are people when they have ideas of what they want to put in one of their digital selves? What are the resources they have around them to capture it? How do they want to handle the media? The construction of a digital bin or pasteboard where they can put their collection of artifacts that they might want to share, give them a space to work. Particularly for social networking sites and personal web pages, a history that helps them reflect how they've changed. These products generally just capture who you are in the moment. And in addition, sort of by understanding the process, can we give the students content acquisition exercises that help them more fully explore who it is they might be and actually improve the quality of experience of making that transition. So we're doing very traditional user-centered design, conducting interviews, and we're every week capturing images of their digital selves, looking at how they change. And the interviews have been sort of very interesting in that what we see in the digital selves and what we see at the interview are not always the same. But the tool that's sort of proven the most interesting is we're having them take a lot of pictures of trying to get them to express who they are in a very quick and easy way. So we ask them every week to take 3 pictures of things they think people associate with college students. And that helps us understand what do they think the social role of a college student is, and does that change over time. They also take 3 pictures of products people associate with college students that they would never want associated with them. And that gives us a view sort of both on the social identity and the ideal identity from the negative. What don't they want connected to them? We have them take pictures of stuff they use as a college student that's particularly important to them. So that's an insight into their social identity, and products that they desire. And that's our insight into the ideal identity. And we've seen some really interesting results. I'll just share some early findings. So one, this idea that the digital selves really are often not a good match to the actual participant. A good example, we have 2 participants who my research team describes as angry women. I think of them as like Alanis Morissette, angst-filled, out to change the world, down with corporations. And so I have like juniors, seniors, and grad students working as my research assistants going out and conducting the interviews. They'll come back and say, they're so nice. They're such nice girls. And there's this huge disconnect between what they're expressing and who they are. And you can really begin to see that they're saying, is this who I want to become? Is this what I should be as a college student? In exploring this issue of digital content acquisition, like do they want to go out and capture artifacts in the world that they can use to create and construct themselves, what we actually found is they have this much bigger desire to browse what other people's profiles look like. And interestingly enough, they particularly want to do this while in class. Interesting. And it's one of those questions of why. Why is it in class that they're actually thinking of their social connections? Is it because they're surrounded by their community? We had them all take pictures of things they don't want associated with them as a college student. And of our 20 participants, all of them took pictures of beer, which was just this amazing consistency that we haven't seen anywhere else. And I think for the research team and myself, we're so embedded in the culture of Carnegie Mellon, like to us that's college, even though it's sort of very idiosyncratic, that the idea of beer and college was not an association we make. And so the fact that they were bringing this in was partly that they're not indoctrinated into the culture of Carnegie Mellon yet, but that also there's this idea of what college is that you bring from high school may be actually quite homogeneous. And finally, in looking at the products that they desire, there was this real move from fantasy to practicality. So in the first weeks, we were seeing things like, I want a surround sound system, I want a sports car, I want a new high-end laptop, I want this really cool stuff. And by about a month in, we were seeing things like, I want an umbrella, I want a jacket, I want a bag, like a backpack. And in sort of looking at the tools they use, they went from like, I use my phone, I use my laptop, I'm hip and cool, to things like, I use Tide. Like mom's not around anymore. And this was a part of college they didn't anticipate. And yet that reality is smacking into them and actually changing them. So I don't know where the product opportunity is here, but I feel there is one. And as we move forward, I think it's actually this really rich space. And in sort of trying to operationalize this as a tool, we're using a persona technique But instead of like the traditional set of personas where you say, well, here's a typical user, or here's a kind of an extreme example of a user, we're actually doing it over time. So here's a college student in their first week. Here's a college student a month in. Here's a college student 2 months in. So we can actually understand the change that's taking place, and can we design a product that scaffolds that. The other project where we're really focusing on identity is a smart home project on family control in the smart home. And we're looking at what should a smart home do for dual income families. And we're really interested in dual income families for a number of reasons. One is that they're aggressive adopters and really experimental users of technology, particularly communication technology. And we see them as very ripe early adopters for ubiquitous computing. In addition, they feel like really crappy parents most of the time. Partly they're very sensitive to this because they've chosen to be dual income, and so they feel like socially they're making this choice that other people perceive that they're bad parents, and they carry that with them. So from a design perspective, trying to make people that feel really crappy feel a little bit better seems much easier than trying to find people that are already happy with themselves and making them feel better. Our third reason is my main collaborator, Aninde, and myself, we are dual income families with little kids, so we're trying to make things that make our personal lives better. And the nice thing about university research is you can be tremendously self-indulgent and still get funding. So one of the main findings that drives us in this space, we like this idea from Valerie Frisian at TNO, is this idea that dual income families, particularly with young children, feel like they live in the rush hour, like every moment of their life is the rush hour. They've got a million things to do and they're trapped in traffic and cannot get anywhere. And it's this just constant anxiety that drags on them. From a ubiquitous computing sense, and even an HCI sense, we're trying to recast this idea of control. So in general, in UbiComp, when they talk about control of a smart home, it's what can I make the devices in my home do? And we're really recasting that, looking at these families. They really don't care what devices they control. They want to feel more in control of their lives. So instead of saying, what can I do with my home, it really becomes, what can my home do for me that makes me feel better? And that's a really radical change in perspective. We got a lot of great feedback from that at UbiComp. And sort of trying to model what all this means, we look at this identity space at the bottom. There's this real desire for these dual income parents to feel like good parents, and they're very sensitive to this, but they actually really desire it. And part of that is like, how can I empower my children to succeed? And this may be a particularly American phenomena with high levels of layoffs, but there's this desire to give their children survival skills that drives them to enroll them in enrichment activities. So they'll enroll them in soccer, not just to fill their time or because the kids like soccer, but they want them to get teamwork skills. They want them to get leadership skills. And there are actually all of these sort of larger identity goals that drive all of these activities their kids become involved in. And this is what Chuck Dara defines as sort of the busyness of the dual income family, that there's sort of all of this stuff you need to manage, all the little details, and that parents actually desire to effortlessly manage the busyness and demonstrate that effortless management of it to their children, because that's a life skill they want their children to have. But the parents really don't effortlessly manage the busyness. That's one of the main drivers of why they feel so crappy. The deviations in the life are the biggest causes of breakdown. So if you look at an example like soccer, it's the one we see repeatedly, parents have to remember practice uniforms, home uniforms, away uniforms, different kinds of shoes for different kinds of surfaces. That practices take place in one area at one time, games take place in a whole bunch of different places, they have to arrange the transportation. And it's a struggle, but they seem to be able to maintain all that. But then once every 6 weeks, you also have to take orange slices for halftime. And this high deviation activity is where the breakdown almost always occurs, and that there's this tremendous social cost for your child to be the child that didn't deliver the orange slices at halftime, that your failure becomes your child's failure. And then you see these parents like dropping the kids off, running like maniacs, trying to find oranges, getting a little plastic knife, trying to cut them up to deliver for their kids. They don't feel good about themselves. They don't feel good about the situation, and there aren't a lot of tools that can support them in this. And so when things are working, they feel completely controlled by their schedule. They have no flexibility to do anything. And when things aren't working, they feel completely out of control. So how can you design a home that sort of finds the balance between the two, that makes them feel in control of their lives? And that's really what we're doing, and that loss of control really impacts their identity and again drives this feeling that they're not a good parent. So we feel this is a huge product opportunity space. In taking an identity perspective in sort of doing this work, we don't have a lot of great techniques, but one of the things we're doing is just sort of keeping our eyes open for what we see. So we've spent a lot of time looking at calendars, just trying to understand how people organize the activities. And this is an example of a calendar we found in a home. And if you'll notice on the 22nd, the word misfits is written in these huge blue letters on the calendar. And this is a play that their child is in. And this is not written on the calendar because the parents are afraid they're going to forget that this is taking place. But this is a way that the parents express to both themselves and their child, sort of constructing this family identity, that this kind of activity is very important to them, and they're making a very sort of public presentation of the importance of this event. And so the calendar then goes from just sort of a marker of deviations of the things I need to remember to do, to also a place of expressing what is important to a family. And generally, that kind of idea is almost never considered by people making digital calendaring artifacts. So the design questions that come out, and I just love this picture because this is what it always feels like when I try to work at home. My kids start riding their bikes inside. Can the home make parents feel like better parents? Is there a real opportunity there? I think there's this huge question of control. If you think the home is sort of the largest identity possession somebody has, it's a fabulous possession for identity because it allows you to imprint on it. I put my furniture in it. I get to choose what the house is. I get to paint the walls any color I want. I can come and, if I have enough money, move walls around, redo things. I can make it my own. What happens when a house becomes sort of proactive and starts doing things? There's this loss of control, and do we fundamentally change what a home means? And how can designers become very sensitive to that? There's also this sense of when do devices become the home itself? So in general, things like a microwave or a KitchenAid mixer very much just feel like a device in a house that you take in and out. But things like your hot water heater, your furnace, your electricity feel like they're the home. And at what point are we designing devices, and at what point are we actually designing the home itself? And I think designers need to be very sensitive to that, particularly in this case of identity construction. And finally, how actively should the home participate in identity construction? Should it say things like, gosh, you're being a good mom today? Like, should it give that kind of feedback? And actually, we tested one of those ideas in an experience prototype we did where the home said, you've done a great job today. Let me pour a bath. And we thought, we're way across the boundary. People are going to react really negatively to this. And the parents were like, oh, thank you. And it's like it just reminded us, children never say thank you for all the things you do for them. And the parents are actually so starved for recognition of what they do, they would take it from the home. It's like, wow. We were just goofing around. We didn't mean to find that. But for us, it's just sort of every space we look here, we're seeing great opportunity. So we're making a construction, we're constructing an activity manager, which is, the real focus functionally is to assist with planning, coordination, and improvisation around sort of getting all of these activities done, of managing the busyness. And we're really looking at reducing the breakdowns by finding the high deviations and sort of rising them to the surface so they're easy to see. And that deals functionally with all of the stuff that's sort of causing the negative effect, but in sort of just testing those ideas, we found we really weren't making people feel like better parents, and potentially we were creating a situation where they were just going to do more stuff, which isn't necessarily what we want, that they're just doing more and feeling just as crappy. So we started to tease out these other ideas, one being this idea of gifts of time. How can the home create opportunities for people within the family to make investments of their time and attention on the other people in the family? So if you look at an activity like cooking, a lot of the parents that we talk to feel like when they cook for their family, they're making an investment and it makes them feel like a better parent. But when they make a shopping list, they don't get that feeling. So what's just sort of the maintenance work? What is really a valuable activity, and where can you begin to offer assistance that gives real value? And so we're trying to sort of look where are the opportunities for automation, and then what are the sort of family identity weights of those activities to get a better sense of how automation comes in. We're also really playing with this idea of raising resources. This comes out of another one of our experience prototypes where we had people walking by a dryer, and it would say, oh, your kids are clothes in here. Since you're here, maybe you should take them up and put them away. And the parents pretty much across the board said, don't tell me that. Tell my kids to put their own clothes away. And it's this idea of can the home play an active role, particularly an automated home, in providing opportunities for parents to give responsibilities to their children, to actively participate in raising, with this idea that the goal of the home is to help parents raise children who can go out in the world and be successful. And again, traditionally, UBIComp does not frame the evaluation of their products in those terms. So finally, I just want to bring this all together, the final slide. I believe, actually, that taking an identity construction approach, taking this idea of designing for the self, of how a product connects somebody back to themselves, provides a rich perspective for HCI practitioners to engage in experience design. It's sort of not meant to replace other methods people are using, but to supplement it. And I think there's a great potential to design products and services that allow for a much stronger attachment. I'm interested in can we make the process more explicit? Can we make it clearer that people are engaged in identity construction? Can we scaffold life changes? Can we design products that help people through these transitions and therefore bind themselves to people much more strongly? And can we help people feel better about themselves in the roles they enact, both at work, where I think there are huge opportunities, and generally in their life and all of the roles they interact. And I think those are actually great opportunities. And that is it for me.
I think we may have time for a question or two. Does anyone? Michelle?
Michelle, or do you want to?
I was really interested in your mention of the home as one artifact of an identity, because I'm curious about situations where people might have different identities they're trying to either present to the world or construct as ideal ones, and what happens when there's a situation where you might want to hide pieces or more strongly present other pieces of an identity. For example, as a home, if you have a home office and you have clients coming to visit you, you're proud to be a good parent, but you might want to sort of suppress some of the artifacts that do that. Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a lot of that behavior, and it's actually also very complex because particularly children, as they get older, more towards their teen years, have this desire to express their own identity, particularly in their bedrooms, in a way that the parents don't appreciate. And there's questions of ownership, of whose identity is the house, who owns it, and what's a family identity and what's an individual identity. And so we see a lot where people sort of construct very private spaces, and almost going into that space puts you in a specific role. And the home office is definitely one of those, where sort of you're not the mom when you're in there. You're sort of engaged in this worker role. And I don't know if it's possible to sort of make the home recognize the roles you are and transform the services it's providing you based on its recognition of who are you in this moment. There's also this interesting tension between parents and kids, where the kids desire security, but they also desire independence, and the parents desire to take care of their kids and desire to make their kids responsible. And sort of there are these two paradoxical forces constantly competing, but that's sort of what family is, and I'm not sure it's the home's role to get involved in that big quagmire.
You said that people's wish lists, the first-year students' wish list, changed over time. Do you think that's a process of the fact that they're in university and responsible for themselves, or partly the exercise of making these lists? So how much is the exercise influencing the student?
Well, I think the exercise definitely has an influence. Although we try, we try to make it open, like take a picture of anything you want. There's also a desire of people not to take a picture of the same thing. They feel this need to not keep re-representing the thing. But in looking at the transition and sort of looking at the research on the transitions, there's this real change that they're undertaking, and their actual desires do change as they're really understanding who it is they want to be. So I think we're getting some of both. But what's really interesting is the consistency we're seeing across the participants, which makes me feel that we're actually seeing a real effect and not just sort of some artificial effect.
Have you thought of trying it with second years or starting 6 months in to see if it's trying to control that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, if I can keep getting funding, I'd love to track the students through and try to see when do they slow down. What we have seen is at first we were seeing a lot of students using social networking services and IM 6 hours a day. It was definitely impacting their ability to get their schoolwork done, but maybe it was actually really important. And that as they develop a circle of friends, the amount of time they spend doing this goes way down. And I don't know when it sort of hits a steady state, and that to us would be sort of the time to let go. But can you make a product that sort of takes somebody through, and then you actually have this great new transition process of I've graduated from college, what the hell do I do now? Which maybe is often a less happy time, full of a whole bunch of different anxieties.
Thanks, John. We're going to be going to lunch probably around 11:30, and then we'll have some time actually in the afternoon if anyone wants to meet with John. Thanks.